I live in a quiet town in upstate New York, a place where winters can be brutal. I'm used to the snowstorms that trap us indoors for days at a time, but there was one night in December 2010 that I'll never forget. I had just finished my shift at the diner where I worked. It was late, around 11 p.m., and the storm had really picked up. The snow was coming down in thick sheets, and visibility was almost zero. I had to drive home, and I knew the roads were going to be treacherous, but there was no way around it. I bundled up and drove off, gripping the steering wheel tightly as I navigated the slick road. My car's headlights barely pierced through the dense snow, and I could feel the tension in my body as I tried to keep my focus on the road. The snow-covered trees that lined the road looked like silent sentinels in the dark, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. About 20 minutes into the drive, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. In my rearview mirror, I noticed a faint, dim light. At first, I thought it was another car behind me, but there was no sound of an engine, and the light was swaying like a lantern in the wind. It was moving faster than I was, yet it stayed at the same distance behind me, never catching up or pulling away. My hands started to sweat despite the cold, and I tried to shake it off as just my imagination playing tricks. But the light didn't go away. In fact, it seemed to grow brighter, as if whoever or whatever was holding it was getting closer. I tried to speed up, but the snow made the road treacherous, and the light stayed fixed behind me. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone walking on the road, but there was nothing, just the swirling snow. I started to panic, convinced that something wasn't right, but I didn't want to stop. I couldn't stop. As the light grew even brighter, I felt a sense of dread wash over me. It was as if the air had thickened with some unseen presence. I kept my foot on the gas, but my eyes were drawn back to the rearview mirror, unable to look away from the eerie glow behind me. And then, as if it had been waiting for me to acknowledge it, the light vanished. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding. My car skidded to a stop, and I looked around frantically, trying to make sense of what had just happened. There was nothing, no sign of another vehicle, no footprints in the snow, just the endless storm. I quickly turned my car around, heading back toward town. The whole drive felt like something was following me, even though I never saw anything again. When I arrived home, I rushed inside, locked all the doors, and tried to convince myself that it had been a trick of the snow and my tired mind. But to this day, I don't know what that light was or why it followed me that night. Every time I pass that stretch of road in a snowstorm, I feel a cold chill down my spine. My name is Sarah, and I've always lived in a small cabin on the outskirts of town. The area is beautiful, but isolated. Winters can be tough, and snowstorms often trap me in for days, but I don't mind the solitude. One evening in January 2015, a storm rolled in, unexpectedly. It was one of those heavy, swirling blizzards that just seemed to appear out of nowhere. I had just finished my evening chores and was getting ready for bed when the power went out. The house went eerily silent, and I lit some candles to keep the darkness at bay. I wasn't too concerned about the storm. I was used to it. But around 2 a.m., I heard something that made my blood run cold. A soft knock on the front door. I froze. The snow had been falling for hours, and no one would be out in a storm like this. I peeked through the small window by the door, but saw nothing but snow swirling in the wind. Still, the knock came again, faint but unmistakable. I grabbed a flashlight, trying to steel myself against whatever was out there. I opened the door slowly, cautiously. Standing on the porch was a woman in a white dress. Her hair was dark and long, but what struck me the most was how out of place she looked. She was barefoot, standing in the snow without any shoes or coat. The storm was so cold, I could feel the chill in the air even inside, yet she didn't seem bothered at all. She stared at me, her eyes hollow and unblinking. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice trembling despite myself. She didn't answer. She only lifted her hand, pointing toward the woods. "Please," she whispered, almost inaudible over the wind. "Help me." I felt a wave of unease crash over me, and before I could respond, the woman turned and started walking into the snow, disappearing into the storm without a trace. I slammed the door shut, heart racing. I wasn't sure what had just happened, but I knew I wasn't about to follow her. I spent the rest of the night awake, listening for any signs of movement outside, but there was nothing. The next morning I ventured out, hoping to clear my mind. The snow had stopped, and everything was quiet and still. As I walked out toward the woods to see if I could find any signs of the woman, I noticed something odd. The snow around my house was undisturbed. There were no footprints leading up to my porch, no signs of anyone having been out there at all. I still don't know what I saw that night. To this day, I've never experienced anything like it again. But the memory of that strange woman in the white dress still haunts me. The oddest thing is that whenever I pass that spot near the woods, I can't shake the feeling that she's still watching. It was 2008, and I had just started a new job as a park ranger in the mountains of Colorado. I loved the job, but winters in the mountains were always unpredictable. One evening, after a long day of clearing paths for visitors, I decided to head home early. The snowstorm had rolled in around 5 p.m., and I wanted to get out of the park before the conditions worsened. By the time I reached the main road, the snow was falling heavily. The road was barely visible, and the winds made it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. As I drove down the winding road, I saw something unusual in my rearview mirror. A figure, trudging through the snow on the side of the road. It was hard to make out the details, but the figure appeared to be wearing a heavy coat and a hat. I considered stopping to offer help. Maybe they had broken down or needed a ride, but something held me back. The figure moved in an odd, jerky way, like it was struggling to walk. I decided to keep going, but my curiosity gnawed at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I slowed down and glanced back in the mirror again. The figure was much closer now, and it wasn't moving in a straight line. It was swaying back and forth, like it was being pulled by some unseen force. I hit the gas, my heart pounding. The snowstorm had made the roads treacherous, and I didn't want to risk stopping or getting stuck. I could feel the weight of something chasing me, pressing against my back. Every time I looked in the mirror, the figure was closer. Finally, I turned a sharp corner and lost sight of it. I didn't stop driving until I reached home, and even then I stayed in my car for a long time, watching the storm rage outside. When I finally got out of the car, I looked down the road to see if I could see anything. But there was nothing, just the blizzard. I haven't been able to explain what I saw that night, and to this day, every time I drive down that stretch of road during a snowstorm, I can't shake the feeling that something is watching me from the snow.